So you guys were having a debate about minimum wage?
Yeah, over text, we were talking about whether or not it's valid, if it helps workers or not, what the implications are for markets and employers. Certainly a lot of moving parts, and it's not a simple question to answer.
And Holden, I assume you were completely disagreeing with him?
I mean, I just wrote him the interesting after he put his take on it, and then he went on some more. And after I read it, I was like, all right, I think we should have this discussion over podcast and not text.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, hello, everyone. Welcome to Youth Bombs. I'm Carsen.
I'm Holden.
I'm Craig.
And we're the voice of young conservatives in Alachua County. Now, today, I have Holden, resident ANCAP, and Craig, establishment conservative.
Whoa.
Okay, not establishment, my bad. Establishment for right now, okay? Populist conservative, we'll say that.
Okay.
Populist.
And they're going to be going at it on the issue of minimum wage. So, who wants to start?
Holden, would you like to start?
You can go.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I believe that maintaining the minimum wage at $7.25 an hour is good policy for America for a number of reasons. One, without a minimum wage, we have to factor in what the public response will be. You will have an outpouring of support for a high minimum wage at $15 an hour if you abolish it and people are making $2 an hour. So that would be bad. We'd have a situation worse than what we have now. Additionally, we need to have worker dignity. $7.25 makes sense. It's not so high as to distort markets, but not so low as to cause mass complacency, frustration, and indignation at the system. Additionally, without a minimum wage, you may have workers go on unemployment benefits rather than work in the first place. So with that being said, there's a lot of reasons to keep the minimum wage as it is, not to abolish it and not to increase it.
All right, so I think a good way to start with this is from first principles, which is that, Craig, do we know what determines a wage? And
The market value.
what determines like my market value as a employee?
It's subjective based on the employer and what they feel the worker's worth.
Right. So it's subjective, but it's based on marginal revenue product, so productivity. So in economics, we say wages are determined by marginal revenue product. So it's not necessarily like generosity, right? I think, can we agree on that? That it's not like, oh, I feel really generous, so I'm going to pay this person who works at McDonald's $200,000 a year.
Right, exactly.
So the reason that they don't make that money is because their marginal revenue product is not what a very advanced software engineer is. So, so now that we have that set, we can now discuss the wage situation. So, if someone's getting paid a wage, it's not arbitrary. It's because clearly that's what their productivity is saying that they should be paid. So, if someone wants to work for less than $7.25, you said, if they want to work for less than $7.25 and they can't find a better opportunity than that's the market saying their marginal productivity is that much. So you can't, by government price control, just say, oh, well, we're going to make this person's wage higher. It just doesn't work that way. It'll cause, in Austrian economics, we say a priori. So a priori, apodictically, you're going to cause more unemployment than you otherwise would. So those very people that you want to help out are not going to be able to get jobs because their marginal productivity is less than whatever minimum wage barrier you set. So, well, let me address point by point. He says people will be outraged. I agree. People are economically illiterate. The culture is terrible. They tell us that the wages are exploiting workers, even though wages have been going up, even though we're accumulating capital and increasing workers' productivity, making it so that they have higher marginal revenue product, we still are getting...
Holden, with all due respect, can we let Craig jump in first and then we can get to the next point?
All right.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but look, we're not dealing with robots, right? We're dealing with people, some of whom are rational, some of whom are irrational. And what do you do when the communists have an outpouring of support and want to seize the means of production because they feel that they are underpaid at $3 an hour?
Well,
what do you do when they want to destroy capitalism?
Well, clearly they're not underpaid. If they were worth more, they would get paid more. Their productivity would suggest that they should be paid more. So the reason they're getting paid what they paid, once again, is not arbitrary. It's because their marginal productivity says that they should get paid. We can emotionally say, "Oh my God, this is so horrible," but unfortunately, that's just the case. They need to acquire skills. And actually, the worst thing you could do is make it so they don't get a job and they can't acquire skills and develop knowledge in the field and make more money someday. So, worker dignity. This is, I think, an emotional claim. Look, if you want workers to make a lot of money and you want them to be in safe work environments, you want them to get the best opportunities possible, you want to get rid of the minimum wage law, right? For minimum wage laws have one thing that minimum wage laws do. Like, let's say I work in a factory or something, and they make the minimum wage law $7.50 an hour when I was paying my workers $6 an hour. The workers may have been fine with me paying them $6 an hour instead of $7.50 an hour if they knew that AC would be provided the whole workday, right? So it's comfortable. It's more comfortable in the work environment, and I know that I could go use the bathroom. It's not a problem. There's going to be toilet paper on the shelves, right? I'm not working in a crap show. It's a good place, right? Because every dollar I spend on a worker is another dollar I can't spend on something else. So, so you know that you have to make trade-offs, right? So workers are generally okay with you making the work environment a little bit more safe for a little bit of extra money, and that's going to come out of their paychecks if you raise the minimum wage, and then they won't have that stuff. And it doesn't distort markets by definition. Sorry, this is a distortion, right? And this is 100% a distortion. And this is not a free market. This is a price control. The minimum wage is a price control. And unemployment benefits is actually a really good argument for me, because these people are not going to have a job. And where do you think they're going to go? They're going to go ask the government for money. They're going to try and say, oh, well, I don't have a job and I need money to survive. So because they can't get a job legally at the wage that their marginal productivity says they should be getting, then they could just go to the government and expect these benefits. So if you want what you have, I would recommend the opposite. Please get rid of the minimum wage law so these people don't get unemployment benefits leeching off productive people.
Well, specifically on the claim about worker dignity, Craig, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, moral values have a place in policy and in government. If we didn't have morality at all, we'd have a maximum wage because we don't care about people. We'd say you can't earn more than $7 an hour because we don't like you, because too bad. So morality certainly plays a role in we want a good outcome, so we're going to have good policy. There's a lot of bad policy out there that needs to change, but I would hope that we progress towards good policy. And when we have a worker baseline, it gives them the ability to have more leverage with the employer without cutting the employer's wage so much, or they're earning so much that they can't even run their business. We're not talking about $15 an hour. We're not talking about $25 an hour like the radicals do. We're talking about a low baseline that is enough to give workers some semblance that their work is valuable, that they are contributing, and that they are not being undermined at every turn by someone who would want to pay them $3 an hour, because we know they would and we know they could. China, for example, we're not China, but they do pay people $3 an hour. If they could, they would.
Well, Craig, I just want to say, why that specific baseline? Why $7.25? Why not something higher? I mean, you keep saying we're not doing $15 an hour. That's too radical, but why not?
Well, the issue is where we're at right now. If we raise the minimum wage, we know it will cost jobs. We don't want to lower the minimum wage because we know that the standard that which it's set provides stability, and employers know what the baseline is. So that being said, it's a question of policy and where we take things from here. The stability of the 725 mark makes sense.
And should that be adjusted for inflation year over year?
No, because that will kill jobs. We don't want to have a situation where we're continuing to raise it in circumstances where it may not be able to be afforded. For instance, with the 20% inflation that we had over the past couple years, that would be very tough for businesses to swallow. We couldn't afford a 20% hike in the minimum wage. You'd probably have a minimum of 1 million people losing their jobs.
Great. We admit minimum wage law causes unemployment. I'm glad we got there. But to address our China thing, I mean, the capital stock in China is far less per person, so their wages are going to be much lower. I mean, we could cry about it and say this is horrible, but once upon a time, not even that long ago, they were making way less than that. And in many places in Africa that are developing, they make way less than they do in China after China's accumulated a massive amount of capital over the last 20 years. Is that a bad thing necessarily? No, I don't think so, because their marginal productivity is saying that that's what it is. Do you want those people to starve? Because that's the alternative, right? People especially in poor countries, but in a rich country like the United States, they could leech off of a more productive sector. But still, you're going to have a huge amount of people. Like there are plenty of people who could produce some value. They could sweep floors. They could, they could clean counters or whatever it is, whatever low skill task they could do. They could be acquiring skills right now, and they could be working, at least earning something that their marginal productivity says they could earn. But they're not, because of the minimum wage law and regulations that make it so they can't get hired. So in your world, you're going to have a certain swath of the population, a certain amount of the population that can't get a job, because their marginal productivity isn't high enough. And so if we admit that, if we just face the economic reality that marginal productivity is what's going to determine someone's wage, not feelings, not emotions, subjective value of the marginal productivity in consumer goods that the labor will produce into the future, that's what the wage is going to be determined by. And let's just get on with this. Because if minimum wage laws actually cause prosperity, we should raise it to $1 million an hour. We'll all be rich. Everybody could be rich. We all just earn $1 million an hour, and we don't have to worry about this anymore. But it's just, price controls just don't work.
So Holden, specifically when it comes to the restaurant business, we'll talk about. What would you respond to with when it comes to something like McDonald's versus a local alternative, and that McDonald's could pay, say we'll give a random number of $18. We'll say they could pay that. A small business could only pay $9. So what would you say? As far as minimum wage, as that relates to that, like, couldn't that McDonald's or those big chains drive away their competition by just paying an arbitrarily high rate?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you're saying like, hold on, let me make sure I understand. Are you saying like the big corporations are going to try and make it so the minimum wage is higher, or like you're saying just like like, what are you trying to say?
Yeah, couldn't the small business get driven out by that arbitrarily high wage that might not be sustainable in the long term?
I mean, if they pay a higher wage than marginal productivity suggests, then the business is going to suffer. So and smaller companies have flexibility. They could offer equity generally more easily, and they could offer other benefits that bigger businesses don't. And that's for workers to decide. But it's not a good business strategy to arbitrarily pay more than marginal revenue product, because if you do that on a long enough time frame, the profit and loss statement won't be looking very well.
All right.
Gotcha. Well, I'd say if the bottom is unbearable, you're going to have mass discontent, and that's a huge problem for society. That would make the problem worse than it is. And in addition, if you have that wage law too low or not at all, then people will say, well, I can just get more money from the government by being on welfare. So why don't I just do that and not work? I'll get the equivalent of $15 an hour with welfare versus $5 an hour from this job.
Yeah, I mean, we should abolish all welfare. Let's get rid of all of it. I mean, but two wrongs, of course, don't make a right. We shouldn't have a minimum wage law. We shouldn't have welfare. All of it should go. Unemployment insurance should all go away, and we would be far more productive. People would actually find jobs. If we get rid of all the restrictions on regulations and labor laws, it would be amazing. We could get we complain about all these homeless people, right? But these people, if it weren't for all the restrictions, it weren't for all the minimum wage laws, they could work for a few bucks an hour and actually be in the productive force of society instead of leeching off of productive people.
Well, Holden, I can see you are not a bleeding heart libertarian. Craig, your response?
Yeah, look, there are going to be people that need help. And the problem is that if we just have no minimum wage and they have no bargaining power, then still the answer for them that they're going to take is going to be, I will take the welfare instead of the job. So you won't have certain segments of the population jumping into the labor force like we want. And I know that you want to get rid of those welfare programs, but we're also faced with a situation where we can't just abolish that, right?
Even with the welfare state the way it is, you're still going to have more people on it if you have a minimum wage law, because a certain segment, like once again, of the population, there's not going to generate enough marginal revenue product is going to be lower than a minimum wage, so they won't be able to get a job. More people will be on welfare. So once again, if you want less people on welfare receiving unemployment benefits, you should want to get rid of the minimum wage law. Even in this circumstance, it makes sense not to have a minimum wage.
I'd say that their calculated move is going to be the opposite, but I think that's where we disagree.
Well, with that being said, thanks everyone for watching. We really appreciate it. We upload 3 times a week, and if you'd like to email us, you can do so at youthbombs@alachua-republicans.com. Thanks so much, everyone.